Hey gang, today we're going to take a look at all my aquariums. About every 6 months or so, sometimes I break that rule, but every 6 months or so I take you on a tour of every single aquarium that I've got running and I explain what's going on with it. Hope you guys enjoy it. It's coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec, and every now and then we take a look around my tanks and I just kind of give you an evaluation of all my tanks that are going, and I thought we'd just start right here. The 210 has been a whole lot of fun, a whole lot more fun than really even I realized it would be. Having a huge tank is so much different than any of the experiences that I've had with these smaller tanks. Now, some of that seems really obvious, like, of course, you know, visually it's larger and stuff, but it's really, what surprised me is the maintenance. Normally, a new tank, I go through this, like, very predictable set of circumstances where it gets too much algae, and then I'll fight that back, and I add some fish, and then there's more algae. And you know, there'll be some kind of mechanic, usually I'll discover some sort of mechanical problem or something like that. I haven't had any of those problems with this tank at all. So far the sump has been working perfectly. The Kessel lights, I was surprised, have been very effective, and I'm only surprised because I bought sort of smaller ones than you would generally put on a big tank like this. But they've been working really well. The plants and stuff that I put in here seem to be growing. There's a few of them that have died back a little bit and maybe aren't as great as they could be, but for the most part, everything I put in here seems to grow eventually. Like, I've had a slow startup on a couple of little plants, but I think overall it's done really, really well. And I'm always excited to show it. It's a nice tank to have in the living room. I can see it from pretty much anywhere downstairs that you are, just because it's so large. What's funny is on film you don't really get a sense of the scale of this thing, but it is enormous. And when I started looking at videos and I saw people saying, "Oh, I'm sitting in front of my XYZ size tank," you know, I thought, "Oh no, you know, 210 gallons. That's not really going to be that big." But I can't really imagine a bigger tank than this in this space. It really fits the space perfectly. It's not a tiny tank, and it's not a absolutely enormous tank. You know, I could probably go. I'd say probably I could have done a 300 gallon or something like this, but I got a great deal on this tank, and all the components and stuff that went with it, so I'm pretty excited about it. I love this thing. I've been really happy with this background. This is the first time I've ever tried one of these backgrounds like this. Now, I've had some foam ones from the Fluval Flora aquariums, the small aquariums, and I was apprehensive because when I was putting this in, it seemed like a lot of wasted space in the back, and especially as it went around the overflows and stuff like that. But the visual impact it has is just tremendous. I mean, it instantly looks like, you know, even if I never put any plants in here, if I just piled up a bunch of wood or something like that, it instantly kind of finishes up the tank. And it really makes it look professional. Every single person that walks into my house takes a look at this aquarium and just is blown away. So that's terrific. I'm real excited about it. Again, it's still doing great. I haven't added too many more fish. Of course, I added some rainbows. I added the blood parrot. We call him Snapple. I added him. Everybody's getting along right now. It seems to be doing great. Mr. Tubes is doing really, really good. He comes out a lot in the evenings. I don't see him very often during the day. Sometimes I'll throw some food in and I can lure him out. He almost never comes out while I'm sitting next to the tank. I'm kind of glancing over just to see. But yeah, in the evenings, he's really, really active. And what's great is I've got the Kessel lights that set to dim. So they dim down at night, and it gets real dim in there. And then he'll start swimming around. It's like they love that evening time lighting. And that light scheme where it dims down in the evening and kind of slowly comes up in the morning is really cool. I mean, all the fish react very strongly to that, much more than I thought. Like the rainbow fish just go berserk as soon as the sun starts to go down or the light gets dim in there. And Mr. Tubes comes out, and he's always running around, and that's really exciting too. So it's a lot of fun to see all the fish really become active after dark. If you'd like to know more about the 210, how I put it together, and all the components involved, I've made a playlist so you can watch every step along the way putting this together. Okay, so quickly moving on, I've got a bunch of tanks to go through. So the next tank in here, the one right in front of me that you'll see now, is the 27-gallon cube. This tank has pretty much remained the same since I set it up. This tank I really haven't done much with. In the past few months, I just let it grow. I've been pulling plants out and giving them to friends and using them to set up other tanks and stuff like that. The CO2 that I had running in there, I eventually turned off, and I haven't really noticed much of a difference in the plant growth. The plants seem like they're still doing just fine. They might have slowed down just a little bit, but the CO2's been off for, I'd say, probably 3 or 4 months now, and I haven't noticed a huge difference, if any difference, in the way the tank looks and the way it seems to work. So everybody in there is doing really great. If you got a really keen eye, you might notice that I've moved my betta that was in the face tank. I've moved him over here because really the face tank needed a lot of work. We're going to get to that in a second, but he has been really happy in this larger tank. He doesn't bother anybody. Nobody bothers him. He just swims around like he owns the place, and he's great in there. So that's been great for him. He's my newest addition to this tank. Really, everything else in there is the same. So it's still a really fun tank to look at. I guess moving on downstairs, we've got the face tank from the Let's Face It video. It's the tank that I initially set up in Chicago, and I brought back here for a contest at the Aquatic Experience last year. And I brought back here and reset it up. This tank has been really up and down. Like, it'll look great, and then it looks terrible, and then it looks great, and then it looks terrible. And by terrible, I just mean that it was overrun with hair algae. I had a really, really bad issue with that would kind of come and go over the course of several months. First, it was kind of like this blackbeard algae, and then it kind of morphed into this hair algae as an issue. Eventually, what I did is I took the betta out, and I put him in the cube, and then I just started kind of messing with do massive water changes and really trying to mess with a level of nutrients that were in the tank. Not throwing food in because there's a betta in there probably helped a little bit. I tested the water to kind of make sure everything seemed like it was okay, and then I started adding shrimp. I've added some Amano shrimp, and I've added a whole bunch of cherry shrimp. Cherry shrimp don't really take care of algae. Yes, they'll snack on algae, and you'll see them picking at stuff, but they are not going to clean up an algae problem. Amano shrimp can, but I didn't really add so many that I could rely on that alone. Over the past couple of weeks, I did a lot of manual cleaning and a couple of massive water changes and stuff, and then all of a sudden overnight it just kind of snapped, and I still got a few issues, but it's like pretty much gone. A lot of the hair algae just disappeared, and it's one of those things, you manually clean it up, but you can't get all of it. I'd still see remnants of it here and there. But I think I got enough of it off that the Amano shrimp could come in and just kind of take over and maybe clean that up. Or the other plants finally started growing the way they should, so they were taking up the nutrients, or God knows, I'm not sure. I did a number of things to beat it, so I'm not sure exactly what the magic bullet was that really helped this thing. I even shortened the light cycle by an hour a day, so it's like maybe 5.5 hours. But it ramps up and it goes down, so it really doesn't get very much light during the day. This is another tank that had CO2 in it. I let the bottle go ahead and empty out, and while I was dealing with the other issues, I didn't want to add that in as another complicated factor, so I've just kind of let it go for now. I will probably eventually turn the CO2 back on that tank. I really am curious about the effect that it could have on the buse, and I'm wondering if that's sort of the magic bullet. Although they say buse doesn't need CO2, I think it still benefits from CO2, so I don't know. It'd be really nice if I could get that stuff to really grow well, and I'm looking for ways to do that. Speaking of algae, let's move on over to the Speck 16-gallon tank. This is another tank that I've been kind of fighting with a little bit. The plants did not immediately start to grow. In fact, I've added more plants in there as well. I'm finally starting to see some growth here and there. I was able to eventually add the tree back. What I did was I just took a bunch of moss from the Into the Woods tank upstairs and I added it to the tree and I just eventually put it back in the tank. But I couldn't do that until some of the algae that was going on in there started to come under control. Now I've got it to where it's not a huge problem. It's still there. There's still a presence of it there, but it's not terrible. The little tiny rainbow fish that the Australian blue eyes that I added in there, I had a couple die off, and I'm waiting for them to get restocked in my local store before I get any more. But they spend a lot of time really battling each other, really showing off and going at each other. So I think they might be more appropriate in a heavily planted tank with lots of tall plants. So I'm thinking about moving them over to probably the cube or another tank. The little red bristlenose that's in there is doing super well, and the molly that I put in there I've been real happy with because he loves to eat algae. I'd always heard this stuff about mollies eating algae and that sort of thing, and I was excited to see that those rumors were true. He's always picking at stuff, and he's played a big part in helping keep algae under control in there while things really start to settle in and grow. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the tank. My biggest beef for the tank so far is just the lid. I really hate the way they got the lid set up. I find it really difficult to maintain. Now, part of that is that it's a little bit taller than a regular tank. Like, I've got it up a little bit higher than I usually keep my tanks. That lid having the front and the back mechanism that are sort of connected together seems kind of like a pain, and the light that's sort of embedded inside of that works great, except when you want to remove the lid and there's kind of nowhere to put the light and it's strung through the middle of it. So it's got its issues. Most of the maintenance I do, I'm able to just kind of slide the lid back and work with it. And these are kind of a minor beef, but it's something that seems like it keeps coming up as an issue for me, so I thought I'd mention it. Okay, so moving upstairs, I've got the Fluval EB. This is that small Speck, the 2.6 gallon Speck that I just set up a couple of weeks ago. It's a new tank, but it seems to be doing really good. It hasn't had any problems. Of course, I don't have anything in there. I haven't done any water tests or anything. I set that one up. I continue to do a water change on it when the water change cycle comes through. But I haven't tested the water. I haven't done anything. My plan with that is just to ignore it. Let the plants grow, keep the algae off the glass, of course, and make it look nice like that. I've had some diatom algae, that brown algae. It's very common when you first set up a tank, but I've had no major issues with that at all. Then, of course, I've got the Tankception tank. And this tank, of course, was set up to be a temporary holding spot while I figure out what to do with the Flex. Right now, the Flex is sitting there. I'm kind of waiting for some inspiration. I've got Cthulhu kind of standing in there. And my plan has been to make it a Cthulhu-themed tank somehow. But I'm not sure how I want to do it. The little sculpture that I bought for it, the miniature that I bought for it, was a little bit bigger, actually, than I thought it was going to be. And the shape of it's kind of... It doesn't quite fit into what the picture I had in my mind for what I wanted to do with that. So I haven't started it. And I've thought quite a bit about getting the small brother of the Flex, like the Flex 9-gallon, and doing it instead. In fact, I've really heavily considered it. So I'm not sure if I'll continue with my plan to do the 15-gallon. I'm going to leave it there for now, but I don't know. By the end of the summer, I may have changed my mind and decided to do the smaller one instead. So we'll see how that goes. Moving on to the 55, it is doing good. It's holding strong. I think I've finally beaten the hair algae problem. I've had this hair algae problem I've been reporting on for, probably since the first 6 months I set it up. With that one, I'd added a whole lot of frog bit. And the frog bit not only kind of cut the light maybe a little bit here and there, but it really absorbed tons and tons of nutrients. And I pull it out by the handful all the time. And I put some in the pond. I've given some to a friend. His turtle likes to eat it. I always add a little bit of frog bit to a new tank or to another tank just to kind of just because it helps so much. And unlike duckweed, you actually have a chance of pulling it out. But that tank has become really stable. I love all the fish that are in there. It's a lot of fun to sit in front of and just kind of relax in the afternoon while I'm upstairs working on a video or something like that. It's a great tank. Now I do have one less tank than maybe you saw before. I had a Fluval Edge 12 gallon. I actually gave that to a friend of mine from work. Now this friend is the one that gave me the Fluval Edge 6 gallon. A lot of you probably came over and found my videos because of that 6 gallon video. It's the 6 gallon with the orange top and bottom. Got tons of comments on that about why orange especially. But he's the one that initially bought that tank and really helped my channel out a lot just by giving me that tank to set up, even though I didn't have it personally to use. He's given me that tank, and I have the 6 gallon back. I haven't set it up. I've got some plans. I'm trying to work out some things for it and see how I'd like to do that. I've got to totally rework the light because it's the very first generation with the old light and all that. But I gave him my 12 gallon. He's got a young boy, and he thought it would look really neat in their room, and it does look really neat in their room. But I got it all drained down, and he hauled it off, and he's got it now set up in his kid's room, and he's enjoying that right now. So it lives on. So it's one less tank for me to take care of, which means I've got room to set up another tank. And I think in the spot where I had that tank set up is where I'm going to set up the aquaponics tank that I unboxed in my mailbag. So you guys can look forward to that soon. Moving on to the Into the Woods tank, it just continues to grow and be really interesting, but the moss has gotten super, super thick in there, and the Monte Carlo, of course, is getting super, super thick. Now, I've tried to trim it down and stuff, but they're starting to sort of almost grow together. It's still a really cool tank, but it's getting kind of weird in there, and I don't know. I'm not sure what I want to do. I don't want to just pull all the moss out, but that's kind of what you do. Like when you go to grab it, it's all connected together. I've got little branches in there. I've made I made a real pain in the ass for myself, and I'm not sure how to deal with it, what's best to deal with it. I trimmed down the Monte Carlo, and sometimes it looks okay, and sometimes it looks weird. You know, right now, I still like it, and I still like the way it looks, and I don't have any plans to make dramatic changes to it, but I can see in the very near future, I'm gonna have to find a way to deal with that. It might even be to go so far as to, when I'm setting up a new tank, use everything that's in there as a resource and just start moving things over. The clock's already ticking for the Into the Woods tank. It's not as many people have predicted because the wood had degraded and stuff. My trees, they're all fine. They all seem to be doing just fine. But the growth in there has become really crazy, and I might just need to pivot a little bit on how it's planted and how it's set up. But not for a while. It'll be a little bit before I really get to that. Moving on to the Steampunk tank, it is chugging right along. All the fish that I put in there initially are still in there. I mean, that's something. I mean, it's been a couple of years, and they're all just getting bigger and happier. For a little 5-gallon tank to remain, I've never had a 5-gallon tank be as stable as this tank. I mean, it's really incredible what filtering all that stuff through, like the makeshift bog filter in the top, has done an incredible job of like keeping the water nice and clean and well maintained for these guys. I do find that I don't trim it as often as I should. I should really trim that, pull that glass off and trim it a little bit more often than I do. But it's been a really super low maintenance tank, and I'm very, very happy with it. Another casualty we had, unfortunately, is Kerrigan's tank, her saltwater tank. I'm thinking what happened is we had a heater malfunction, and she came home and all her fish had died, and the corals were pretty much dead too. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell with corals. They were extremely mad and angry, but at least one of them kind of looked like it died altogether. She's about to move into her college dorm in just a few weeks, like literally in about 5 weeks. So we decided at this time not to just set it back up and get it going again. She's going to move, and then we're going to see what kind of room she's got in her dorm room and see if she even has room to fit it in there. We were going to try to make it work no matter what while it was running, but now Now we're just going to kind of play it by ear and see what's going on. So we've still got that tank. Have every intention of starting it back up again, but right now it's just kind of too much to deal with. So we're gonna give Kerrigan a break on on keeping her saltwater tank up and just move on. The corals that were left, we were able to give to a friend of hers that works with her at the store. So you know, some stuff lived out of there. There was a snail, I think, that made it too. But for the most part, it was a really tragic day where she came home. She was crying and everything was dead, and it was terrible. It was a really terrible, terrible day. Now moving on to one of my oldest tanks. I think this is one of the oldest tanks that I've got. Yeah, this is the oldest tank that I've got that I actually set up during my YouTube career. I did a video many, many years ago about setting up the 56-gallon column. I think I called it a planted tank journal, okay? That was one of my first larger tanks that I tried to film and kind of do the whole setup. And it's a real learning experience for me. It's funny looking back on it. I think that video was 15 minutes long and people were commenting that that's way too long, you know. And that was one of those videos too where it didn't happen all in 1 week. I think I shot it over the course of like several weeks and then put it together. Unlike now where I basically will set up a whole tank and put it up and then the very next day the video comes out. It's doing super good. I've got the baby rainbows in there. If you'll remember, my rainbows had produced all these babies and I had them in tanks all around. I put them in there, all but one that I can't catch in the 5-gallon. We'll get to that. And I've got some lamp eyes in there. I've got a pandagara in there also, a little baby one of those, and he's growing up in there. I've got some cherry red shrimp because I've got those everywhere. And that tank's doing great. It does get hair algae, weirdly enough, just like a lot of the other tanks I have. It seems to stick right to the top in that Java moss and stuff, and it kind of makes a big green afro there. And I can just pull it up like cotton candy and pull it out and everything seems fine. But that again is a tank where I haven't really added much to it. I've just kind of let the plants in there grow, and every now and then I'll pull something out when I start a new tank or want to give some plants away. But it's been doing great. And the babies are growing up super fast in there, and I still really enjoy it. Okay, so last but not least, of course, we've got the 5-gallon Speck. And this Speck started off in a video called Mini Gardens. And I think I just talked about this a few weeks ago, but the plants in there, they grew out of those little, I had them in these little glass vases and stuff, or something like a vase, stuck to the back. And I thought, oh wow, that dwarf sag really looks cool growing out of them like little plants on the walls. Well, a runner shot out of that and into the substrate and then just started going around, and now it's just covered in that stuff. I've got that plus some Anubis and some Monte Carlo, and I think there's another plant in there too, but it's extremely densely packed. And I've kind of left it that way because I put 2 dwarf puffers in there. Normally that's too small a tank to keep 2 of them, but 1, they're really small still. They're kind of babies. And 2, with that much cover, they can easily hide from each other, you know, and the chasing that goes on doesn't go on very long. But it's doing great, and again, it's easy to maintain. I haven't had to do much of anything with it aside from occasionally pull out plants. And eventually when the puffers get bigger, I probably will rehome at least one of them, but it's a great little puffer tank. And that's it. That's all my tanks I've got up right now. There'll be more. There'll be more coming very soon. This weekend, actually tomorrow, I'm going to set up a tank for a friend, another friend tank. This is a person that found me online, again, on one of those Fluval Edge videos, and then was shocked to discover I was in her town, and then shocked again to discover I just lived down the street. So I'm going over to her house, and we're going to set up a Fluval Edge 12-gallon. So next week's video, be sure to tune in and see me setting up a Fluval Edge 12-gallon for a friend of mine, a new friend of mine from the internet, and that'll be fun. But until next time, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. That's really, really terrific. I'm doing the really, really thing again. So it's very terrific. But it's doing really, really well. Really, really. It's doing very well, and but it's doing, okay. Where you can check out everything you would want to know about this tank. Hey, Snapple. Hey, Snapple. Hey, buddy. Hey, YouTube, this is Pecktec, and once in a while... Hey, YouTube, this is Pecktec, and once again, it's time... Hey, YouTube, this is Pecktec, and once... Okay, this is a blooper reel.